Everyone talks about what Marcus Aurelius achieved, the empire, the philosophy, the legacy, but nobody talks about what it cost him. He lost 5 children. He was betrayed by his most trusted general. He spent years fighting wars he never wanted. He ruled the most powerful empire in history and wrote in his private journal that he struggled to get out of bed in the morning. This is not the Marcus Aurelius you have seen in other videos. This is the real one. And his 9 lessons hit completely differently when you understand what he was going through when he wrote them. Stay with me, because lesson 9 is the one that will stay with you long after this video ends. Lesson 1. The person you are in private is the only person who actually exists. Here is something most people do not know about meditations. Marcus Aurelius never intended for anyone to read it. It was not a book. It was not a manuscript he was preparing for publication. It was a private journal, raw, unfiltered, personal. He wrote it to himself in Greek during military campaigns, late at night, alone. He called it To Himself. And in those pages, he admitted things that no emperor was supposed to admit. That he struggled to get out of bed in the morning. That he sometimes felt the pull toward laziness and self-indulgence. That he had to constantly remind himself of the values he claimed to hold. Almost every entry begins with a command to himself, not advice for others, a command to himself. Think about that, the most powerful man in the world writing commands to himself in a private journal that no one was ever supposed to see. That is the first lesson. The person you are when no one is watching, when there is no audience, no applause, no consequences. That is the only version of you that is real. Everything else is performance. Most people spend enormous energy managing how they appear to others. Marcus spent his energy managing who he actually was. And the gap between those two things is where most people quietly lose their lives. Ask yourself today, if no one could see you, no one could judge you, no one would ever know, would you still make the same choices you are making right now? That question is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be. Lesson 2. Grief is not a weakness. Avoiding it is. Marcus Aurelius lost 5 of his children. Let that land for a moment. 5 children. He buried them one by one while ruling an empire, while fighting wars, while managing political betrayals and a devastating plague that killed millions of his citizens. And in his journal, he did not pretend to be okay. He did not perform strength for an invisible audience. He wrote about loss with a rawness that is almost uncomfortable to read 2,000 years later. But here is what he never did. He never let grief become an excuse to stop functioning. He never let the pain of losing someone become a reason to abandon the people who still needed him. He wrote that loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. He was not dismissing his grief with that line. He had already sat with the grief fully. He had already let it move through him completely. That line was written from the other side of the pain, not as a way to avoid it. This is the second lesson. You are not supposed to bypass the hard emotions. You are supposed to go through them completely, without getting permanently stuck inside them. Most people do one of 2 things. They either suppress the pain and carry it for decades without knowing it, or they drown in it and use it as an identity. Marcus found the third option. Feel it fully, process it honestly, and then keep moving, not because the pain is gone, but because life requires your presence regardless. Lesson 3. The most dangerous person in your life is the one you trust without question. In the year 175, a man named Avidius Cassius, one of Marcus Aurelius's most trusted generals, declared himself emperor while Marcus was still alive. He had served the empire loyally for years. Marcus had given him enormous power and responsibility, and he used that power to attempt to take everything. When Marcus received the news, his response shocked everyone around him. He was not furious. He did not immediately order an execution. He expressed genuine sadness, not at the betrayal itself, but at the fact that Cassius had made a choice that would ultimately destroy him. Cassius was killed by his own soldiers before Marcus even reached him, and Marcus reportedly wept. Not for himself, but for the man who had thrown his life away chasing something he was never meant to have. The lesson Marcus carried from that experience was this: extend trust carefully, not because people are evil, but because power reveals character in ways that normal circumstances never do. The person who is loyal when they have nothing to gain may become someone completely different when an opportunity for everything appears. This is not cynicism. It is clarity. Be generous with your warmth. Be careful with your trust. And when someone shows you who they are under pressure, believe them immediately. If this is already hitting different from the usual Stoic content you have seen, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps the Stoic Thoughts channel reach more people who need to hear this, and subscribe if you have not yet. This community is growing every single day. Lesson 4. You will never fully become the person you are working to be. Keep working anyway. This one is uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius wrote Meditations over many years, and if you read it carefully, really carefully, you will notice something that most people miss entirely. He repeats himself. The same lessons appear over and over again across different entries. Reminders to be patient, reminders not to seek approval, reminders to accept what he cannot control. The same struggles, returning again and again across years of his life. He was not writing these things because he had mastered them. He was writing them because he kept forgetting, because the habits he was trying to build kept slipping, because becoming a better person is not a destination you arrive at. It is a daily practice that never ends. The most powerful man in the world had to remind himself every single morning to be the person he wanted to be. And here is why that matters for you. You are not behind. You are not broken because you keep struggling with the same patterns. You are not failing because growth feels slow and non-linear, and sometimes invisible. You are exactly where Marcus was. The only difference between you and him is not talent or circumstance or intelligence. It is whether you keep showing up to the practice even when the progress is invisible. The lesson is not be better. The lesson is keep returning. Every single day, return to the person you are trying to become. That returning, that daily, stubborn, unglamorous act of coming back, that is what transformation actually looks like from the inside. Lesson 5. Your anger always costs you more than the person it is aimed at. Marcus Aurelius spent years dealing with senators, advisors, and generals who tested his patience in ways most people will never experience. People who lied to his face, people who undermined his decisions in public, people who took his generosity and used it against him. And in his private journal, he wrote extensively about managing his own reactions to people who pushed him to his limits. He wrote that anger and grief do far more damage to us than the things that caused them. He was not saying do not feel anger. He was saying, look at the actual accounting. When you spend an hour furious at someone, who loses that hour? You do. When you lie awake at 3 in the morning replaying a conversation, whose sleep is gone? Yours. The person you are angry at is almost certainly asleep. Marcus developed a practice of asking himself one question before allowing anger to take hold. What will this cost me? And is it worth that price? Not a question about whether the anger was justified. Justified anger is still expensive. The question was always about the cost, specifically his cost, not theirs. Most people never ask that question. They spend years paying enormous personal prices to express emotions that the other person barely registers. The 5th lesson is not about suppressing your anger. It is about being honest about who actually pays for it. Lesson 6. The life you were given is the only one available for practice. In the year 166, a plague arrived in Rome that would eventually kill millions of people across the empire. Marcus Aurelius was in his mid-40s. He was already dealing with military threats on multiple borders. He was managing political instability inside the Senate, and now a disease was spreading through his cities faster than any response he could organize. He could not fix it. He could not stop it. He could not protect everyone. And in his journal during this period, he wrote what may be the most practical Stoic insight ever recorded, not as a philosophical position, but as a survival tool he was actively using in real time. Confine yourself to the present, not as a productivity tip, not as a mindfulness exercise, as a genuine act of mental survival when the scope of what he was facing was too large to hold in his mind without collapsing. He had learned through years of practice that the mind has a natural tendency to break under the weight of everything at once, every past failure and every future fear arriving simultaneously and making the present moment impossible to inhabit. The practice of confining yourself to the present is not about ignoring what is coming. It is about refusing to fight yesterday and tomorrow at the same time as today. You only have the capacity to act right now. Everything else is consumption without output. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the one thing you are carrying right now that belongs to yesterday or tomorrow, not today? Writing it out is the first step to putting it down. Lesson 7. The people who shaped you are not responsible for what you do with what they gave you. The opening pages of Meditations are unlike anything else in the book. Before Marcus writes a single philosophical insight, before any lesson or reminder or practice, he spends pages simply thanking people: his grandfather, his father who died when Marcus was young, his mother, his teachers, each person named, each quality he learned from them described specifically and gratefully. He had a difficult beginning in many ways. He lost his biological father early. He was adopted into the imperial family, a position of enormous pressure and expectation. He was trained by tutors who held him to standards that would have broken most children. And instead of carrying any of that as damage, he carried it as material. Every difficult thing that was handed to him, he converted. Not immediately, not without struggle, but deliberately, over time, with intention. This is the 7th lesson. The circumstances of your past, the family you were born into, the things you were not given, the wounds that were handed to you before you were old enough to protect yourself, none of that determines what you build from here. Marcus did not have a perfect beginning. He had an intentional response to an imperfect beginning. You have the same option. Starting today. If this video is giving you something real, share it with one person who needs it right now. Someone in your life is struggling with something that one of these lessons could help. Send it to them. That is how Stoic thoughts grows, one real conversation at a time. Lesson 8. Dying well requires practicing it long before it arrives. There is a moment recorded by historians that almost nobody who talks about Marcus Aurelius ever mentions. In the year 180, Marcus Aurelius was dying. He had been ill for some time, and he knew the end was near. He was in a military camp on the Danube frontier, far from Rome, surrounded by soldiers and advisors, and in his final days, he reportedly turned away visitors who came to see him, not out of weakness, not out of fear, but because he had spent decades preparing for this moment philosophically, and he did not want the performance of dying to replace the actual experience of it. He had written extensively about death throughout Meditations, not with fear, but with acceptance. He had thought about it, sat with it, made peace with it long before it arrived. So when it came to someone who was ready. He wrote that it is not death that a man should fear, but that he should fear never beginning to live. The 8th lesson is this: Most people spend their lives avoiding the thought of death so successfully that they also avoid the urgency it creates. Marcus used the awareness of his own mortality as fuel. Every morning was borrowed time used with intention. You do not need to be morbid. You need to be honest. One day this will end. That fact, held clearly in your mind without panic, is one of the most powerful motivators available to any human being. What would you do differently today if you genuinely remembered that today is not guaranteed? Lesson 9. The hardest person you will ever have to lead is yourself. This is the one. Marcus Aurelius commanded armies of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. He managed a senate of powerful, ambitious, often deeply corrupt men. He led an empire of millions across dozens of countries and cultures and languages. And in his private journal, written to no one but himself, he admitted that none of that was the hardest part. The hardest part was getting himself out of bed on the mornings he did not want to get up. He actually wrote about this specifically, the temptation to stay warm under the covers when the morning was cold and the day ahead was hard. He wrote about the internal argument he had with himself, the part of him that wanted rest pulling against the part of him that knew what was required. And then he wrote the response he gave himself. You were made for this. This is your work. Not a motivational speech, not a complex philosophical argument, just a direct, honest reminder of what he was for. Here is why this is the most important lesson of all 9. You can understand every Stoic principle perfectly. You can know the philosophy from beginning to end, and none of it will change your life if you cannot lead yourself. Leadership of others begins with leadership of yourself, and leadership of yourself begins in the smallest moments. The moment you said you would wake up early and the bed is comfortable. The moment you committed to something and the easier option appeared. The moment your values and your comfort pull in opposite directions and you have to choose with no audience, no applause, no accountability except your own. Marcus Aurelius was not great because he had power. He was great because of what he chose to do with himself before he ever had power, and then again every single day for the rest of his life. That is available to you, not the empire, not the title, the practice. The daily, private, unglamorous act of leading yourself toward the person you are capable of becoming. Marcus did not wake up as a philosopher king. He built himself into one, choice by choice, morning by morning, page by page, in a journal no one was ever supposed to read. You are hearing it now. The question is not whether you found these lessons interesting. The question is what you are going to do with them when this video ends, because that is the only moment that has ever mattered. Not the inspiration, the decision that follows it. If these 9 lessons gave you something real today, tell me in the comments which one hit you hardest. I read every single comment on this channel and I genuinely want to know. If you are not yet subscribed to Stoic Thoughts, do it right now. Hit the bell. We are building a community of people who are done with surface-level motivation and ready for something that actually changes how they live. Marcus Aurelius spent his entire life trying to become who he was capable of being. He never stopped trying. He never claimed to have arrived. Neither should you. See you in the next one.